Now, for a woodworker like me, I think probably the nicest pen I can turn is the cigar style of pen. And the reason for that is because a lot of wood is showing, and I like to have a lot of wood showing. So here we go with the cigar pen. Now, a few months ago, I made a pen very similar to this. And it's this one right here. I used mahogany. And with this style of pen, the mahogany looked pretty good. But I'm thinking also that because this is such a bold, heavy-duty design, that oak will also look good. So I'm going to use oak on this one. Now, I'm not going to make it big and bold like I did on this carpenter's pencil. But I'm going to make it possibly even a little thicker than this and just see how it looks. After all, it's called a cigar pen. So let's make it as thick as a cigar. Now, not all pen kits that require two blanks have the brass tubes the exact same length, and this pen is one of those. So when I'm cutting up my blanks, I gotta make sure that half the blanks are a little longer than the other. Here I've got enough to make 10 kits. I'll be doing 7 in oak and 3 in cherry. Now the reason I have that little board underneath there is so that when the drill bit exits out the other end of the blank, it just helps a little bit to prevent tear out. Now this pen kit calls for a 10mm drill bit. And I know I mentioned about having that little board under there so that I wouldn't get tear out. Well, this particular drill bit is specially designed. It's called a parabolic drill bit, and it's designed in such a way to prevent tear out, and it does a really good job. I might not even need that little board, but I have it there anyway. I find that if I'm going to make more than one pen, it's easier to do it sort of in mass production. So I've got enough stuff here for 10. Now, I don't think I'm actually going to turn 10 this week, but I'm going to do probably 3. I'll probably do 2 of oak and maybe 1 of cherry. And so I guess I may as well get at it because there's 20 little brass tubes here that have to be sanded. I'm going to do all 20. Probably take me about 20 minutes. You know, I got to make a machine for doing this. Anyway, I bought this mug in New York City in Macy's store many, many years ago, and I haven't broken it yet. Knock on wood. Anyway, here we go. Number 1. By the way, if you put them on a little dowel or a pencil or something and hold it like this, it makes it a little bit easier. Well, there we are, 20 little tubes all sanded. And you know, I found a real easy way to hold those tubes from the inside when you're trying to CA glue them into the blanks. If you wrap a rubber band around a small screwdriver or even a long nail, you can force the whole thing into the inside of the tube. The rubber band conforms to the right size, and then when you're all done, it's easy to pull out. Now, I've only used two different methods for gluing the brass tubes into the blanks. I've used 5-minute epoxy, and I've used CA glue like I'm doing right now. Now, the CA glue method is by far the fastest, probably 10 times faster. And the problem is, you gotta keep that brass tube moving, and you've only got maybe 15 seconds working time. Once you stop moving the brass tube, it's gonna stay where it stopped. Now, sometimes when I'm using the CA glue method, I don't get the glue all the way around the circumference of the end of the brass tubes, and it's just not adhering properly to the wood all the way around. So right here I'm sort of filling in the gaps. And in that way, when I turn it down, I don't need to worry about it breaking out, because at the ends is where it's going to be the thinnest. Well, as I mentioned, I'm probably only going to turn down 3, maybe 4 of these pens this week. But when I want to turn down the rest, these blanks are all ready to go now. Like I say, do it in mass production, it's a lot faster and a lot easier. Now, I know I've said this in other pen turning videos, but because it's so important, I'm going to repeat it. And that is that when you're shortening your blank down to get it to the same length as the brass tube, it is very important that you stop as soon as the sandpaper or barrel trimmer touches the brass tube. Don't go any further, because if you get the whole thing too short, then the pen isn't going to work right. In other words, the ink refill won't retract back into the pen. It'll always be sticking out. Well, it's the next morning, and I've got the rest of these all sanded down to the right length now. But while I was sanding them, I was thinking about, what if the brass tube is not going straight through the blank? What if it's going at a slight angle? What I'm doing is I'm sanding the end of the brass tube square with the blank, not square with the brass tube. Well, in this case, they pretty much are, because I did a pretty good job of drilling straight down through the blank. But what if it's out a little bit? Because sometimes I have had it where they've been off just a little bit. And I think if I was to use the barrel trimmer, I would stand less of a chance of the brass tube not being squared up. And that's what you want. You want the brass tube and everything square. So from now on, I'm going to use the barrel trimmer. Unless I have to use the sander, because I do recall one size of brass tube I don't have a cutter for it. I've only got 4 cutters here. So there must be more cutters available. Anyway, well, there's another reason, actually 2 more reasons, why it's probably better to use the barrel trimmer rather than the sanding disc. And here you'll notice my sanding disc is, actually it's ruined now. I'm going to have to replace it. It's loaded up with the CA glue. And if you were to use epoxy, you'd have the same thing. It'd be loaded up with epoxy. So, got to change it. Put on a new one. Now, I know I don't have to mortgage the house to do that. But, you know, they're not dirt cheap. Anyway, another thing, I've got to vacuum out my filter system now. Actually, I probably would have had to do that anyway. Now, this is the slim ballpoint pen kit, and it's quite easy to turn in that the brass tubes are the same length and the bushings are the same size. So it doesn't really matter too much how you get them on the mandrel. However, this cigar pen is completely different. Every bushing is a different size, and they have to go on in the right order. And the blanks, one is shorter than the other, so that means you have to get them in the right place. So you got to pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, it's ready for the lathe. I've switched over to my narrow scraper here, and I've put on a stronger pair of glasses so I can see closer. And I'll see if I can get in a little closer to those bushings. I'm going to take it down the rest of the way with sandpaper. Now after I took this shot, I did shove this part in just a little bit further, because as you can see, it's just not quite far enough. Well, okay, it's finished. But the question is, does it work? Well, this is its first time, and for a first time, it did real well. Well, it's the next morning, and I just finished turning down the cherry. And I've got to admit, when I don't have to fool around with the camera, two things happen. It's a lot faster, and the turning is a lot more fun. Anyway, well, I personally like the oak the best. That's my own personal preference. Other people might like the cherry. Anyway, I should say that this kit worked together really well. I didn't have near the trouble with it. In fact, I didn't have any trouble with it. Both of those kits. No problems at all. Everything fit together. I didn't have to use crazy glue on any of the joints. It's a nice kit. And by the way, I did have to look at the instructions, you know, to get the order for the bushings. You know, I could have figured it out, but it's sure a lot easier if the instructions say, put the second smallest one here, put the largest one here, put the smallest one here, and so on and so on and so on. It's a lot easier, right? I'm not the expert that some people think I am. I'm just sort of muddling through a lot of these videos, as probably some of you have already guessed. Anyway, however, this is my idea, and it works really well. Put a little elastic band around something a little smaller than the inside of the brass tube, shove it in. Hey, this is slick. I've never seen anybody else do this. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't know which pen I'm going to make next. I do have 2 or 3 different more kits, and we'll see what happens. So, as they say in Australia, cheers. I think it's Australia that says cheers. Anyway, that's yesterday's coffee.